Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
All right.
How's it going?
Okay. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well.
Good.
How are you guys?
Pretty good.
Jesse, do you have smoke in Boston?
We did, yes. And all the way down. Trying to think who's the most south person I know have experienced. It was awful yesterday. It's totally fine today, thankfully. But all the people I know in New York and like up and down New York State have had it.
Wow.
Yeah, I've seen pictures from New York City, and it's dystopic.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if I made the choice to like spend 30 minutes outside yesterday biking. But it's, as you may know, biking, Boston is heavily tried to make people use the bike lanes here in the actual city of Boston proper. And it's actually one of the best ways to get around.
Yeah.
like I can outrun the T. I'm not like the best athletic person in the world, but I can do a lot better than the T most times. And more than once, oh, I'm going to tell this great story because I love telling this story because it's such a Boston story and it's such a me story.
Yeah.
But basically, one time I was very sick, and I kind of mismanaged like a throat infection or nasal infection or something, and I kept trying to fight it the wrong way. But eventually, I was smart enough and got to like an urgent care place, and was like, "Oh, you just need an antibiotic." Like, okay, and I think it was. It might have been like right before the We Robot trip last year to Seattle, or some event. It was some conference that I had to leave the area to go to, and I'm like, oh man, it was Friday or Saturday, and the pharmacy is going to close, so I had to figure out how do I get. It's kind of like later in the day, like 4 o'clock or something. How do I get to the drugstore to get my prescription Saturday afternoon so I could take it as soon as possible and have like a day or two to recover before my flight? And so to do that, me and my friend took me to the urgent place, and we both they called Uber and I called like the other like Lyft or something to get the car so you get there fast. And I got one first, and we got in the car, and I'm like, man, this is taking forever just to navigate like 2 miles or so. So I ended up I just said to the guy, hey, let me off here. And I jumped out of the cab as I was sick and ran to one of the blue bike stations and took a blue bike to get to the drugstore because I knew that I would have a chance that way. And so, of course, I'm lucky to have made it in time, being completely out of breath and sick. But it's just like I think in the city of Boston proper, biking, and that's why they have the people with the bike, electric bikes, and the scooter, and this crazy stuff, like ridiculous stuff you see here. But it is the way to go. And I made that choice again last week or yesterday, and hopefully I didn't damage my lungs too much because I was like, oh, maybe I should bring a mask. I don't know, it's okay. But it just seemed to get worse. And then after I got in, I was looking at the air quality index, and it kept getting worse. And like, yeah, I'm not going to go out at all the rest of today. And thankfully, it's cleared up here. But I don't know, is it affecting you guys at all, or is it just?
No.
It's a little crazy here, and we have a warning that it's unhealthy for sensitive groups.
Yeah, that's what I saw too.
But it's not. It's like maybe a little hazy, and the light is like a little weird and red, but it's not. It kind of reminds me of when there was a partial solar eclipse.
Oh,
right.
also it was like just as bad a few weeks ago when I don't know if it was the same fire that's just gotten worse since then, but I know it was from Canada. A few weeks ago. It's not any worse today. At least, yeah, not here.
Yeah.
I was in the Upper Peninsula though, up
Okay.
near, and it was pretty. It was actually pretty hazy there. It was weird. I wonder if it's worse now.
Wow.
Okay.
There will be smoke. Oh yeah, there will be smoke in the air.
It'll be blood too, but any other updates for I know we didn't make last week. I was not in basically in good shape for a variety of reasons, but I'm better now. So unrelated to the smoke, but I appreciate not meeting that time basically.
You have a problem?
Okay, sounds like you had a good time camping. Otherwise,
Yeah, it was beautiful. Lots of mosquitoes, maybe the worst mosquitoes I've experienced. But it was only mosquitoes. There were no like black flies or stable flies. It could have been worse. Yeah, it was really pretty.
Okay. Probably like a little bit, I suppose. Okay. And you're doing all right there, Bradley?
Oh yeah, I'm doing fine.
Oops. Totally screwed everything up. Nope. I don't want to exit that. All right. Yeah. There we go. Corner set up. Yeah, I'm okay too. Glad you're okay. Here we go. So last we left off, I think we basically did. We should go here and show this like this. We talked a lot about the Indian Civilito stuff, rebranding, open house, and things like that for us. And these really general updates. We talked about phenomenology reading group. We talked about this is kind of related. I mentioned this to Bradley a little bit. I said, hey, I would like there eventually to be some kind of a component of, I don't know what. It could be a bunch of things from cognition futures to society ethics tech. Basically, there's certain moral claims that phenomenology, I don't feel like it's taking a political stance, although it kind of inherently is, but it's sort of like there's something about the inherent ethics of describing different embodiments that I find very relevant, particularly to things like, I think Amanda, I think there's a quote down here that you said really well. Like all of this stuff was great. I really liked this whole section, but about just, I think about it in terms of looking at my life, neurodivergence, disability, people who have different baselines of experience, chronic illness also is a big thing. They're kind of all related in some ways for people in my life, and I find that to be. I kind of floated a bit of a project idea to Bradley. Like it's not anything I can pinpoint right now, but maybe as some kind of a sub thing as I'm building out like cognition future stuff down the road. There may be kind of an interesting sub component there. I don't really know exactly what it is, but that's on my mind a little bit.
Yeah, you had said something about neurodivergence and that you were talking with Avery about it. And I mean, yeah, so, it'd be nice if you could give us a short sort of just kind of a proposal of what you think we might do under that banner or whatever it is. I don't know what the levels of organization are here, but exactly, or what it would be, but like, I guess it would pull in some of the things you've been talking about, some of the would cross different projects. So probably society, ethics and tech, and cognition futures. But just like basically things you want to do. And I see you have your paper pyramid up. So what would be how would you get down to like the deliverables that we talk about?
Yeah. I feel like what's my immediate answer to that right now, like my instantaneous demo or die version of it, which is just like a couple sentences I can say about it. I don't have anything to add to this immediately.
Yeah.
But well,
I think a pyramid in this case might be like just like what is the base? Where are you going to be drawing from? Like when you say neurodivergence, what does that mean to you? Because I notice that people will say like they'll throw out a name. This week there's a nice example. People talk about spatial computing, and like, is it a marketing term or is it like an academic term, or what do people mean by that? And so I think it's important to clarify those things, outside of like how people want to use them, and like what do they actually map to. Like I think of neurodivergence in the sense of, because I'm sure there are different ways people study it. So that'd be great. And then like the pyramid would just simply be, where are we starting from? What are our basic things that we're bringing to this? And then, where we, then maybe like read key readings or whatever. And then what do we want to do from there? Do we want to like produce a, working group or like a discussion group, or like some stock presentation you can just make up, or, even a paper or preprint or something like that. Just show a path from like the things you mean, when you say this, how you triangulate where that is in the world, and then put that triangulation on a triangle at the bottom, and then go from there, moving up.
And that will take a little while to get set up, in part because I see half of this project as kind of like, I see half of this project as sort of like actual. I see it kind of divided like this, in that there's sort of the theory, and then some of the stuff is, for lack of a better term, just straight up like political. Well, I'm not going to spell this well. But like theory as it relates to phenomenology. And my question, like a big question for me, is how to approach along that. Because I could do a version of this project where it's explicitly political and not really engage in a theory, and just like, oh, well, here's the current limitations of how people talk about chronic illness, disability, and like the issue, like kind of the space about there's big contention about diagnosis and criteria for diagnosis, and how that affects. There's gatekeeping around that. There is a lot of medical strife and contention, and both like in terms of a practice of how it affects people, and then also just regardless of sort of getting certified by a medical institution, or getting that, okay, yes, you have this thing, yes, you have a chronic, yes, you have an XYZ, yes, you have autism, yes, you have ADHD. Like beyond that, there's sort of the struggle of like what are people doing with this too? And there's a lot of, one of my friends went back to therapy and was floating around the idea of, oh, maybe I have a neurodivergent, autistic, whatever, and they got a lot of, well, everybody has that now, and it's a big thing, and there are a lot of pushes in that way, and it's like that's like a whole quagmire of stuff, and it matters. I don't necessarily feel like I want to dive into advocacy for this, or at least like that's not like, yes, it matters to me, but like, is that what I want to do? Like, I'm hesitant about that, or at least I really want to have something more theoretically that I want to push forward here. And so that's sort of my initial thoughts about where we are on it. I don't want to co-opt this group into it. I don't want to steer the methods project into it. I don't want to dilute the efforts of the methods project for it. However, it is something that I feel like is going to be, there's a version, and this is kind of dovetailing back into some bigger things for like rebranding and bigger things that kind of like what, I'll just put it here. There's like, it's been a difficult week to do some of the deep in the weeds stuff for the projects. I haven't pushed a lot of things forward, but I have been doing a lot of really high level work for like, how am I structuring stuff both in this lab with JoePro in the future, and like what am I positioning for, and doing a lot of the unpleasant, not really fun background work to eventually get to a place where like I can support certain discussions, but also I would really like to have, I kind of hope that Cherry, I think it's Chu Yen or Chuyan, she joined and she goes by Cherry. I really would love to say, hey, please be it, if you want to do more like agent-based modeling stuff or do stuff directly with the methods project, whatever it is, like I want to set up a meeting with her specifically because she looks like super, super duper, the most outrightly cognitive science person we've ever had. Say, hey, I do cognitive science. I'm done cognitive science research and I want to join the lab. And it's like, hell yes. What can, how do we make that? So, there's some, I'll say.
Yeah, I had noticed that she's very cog-sci oriented. So, yeah, we should definitely, we were going to set up a meeting. You just put a message in the Slack a couple hours ago. So, yeah, we should set that up definitely and try to get some momentum there because.
Yeah. And that's why, like, it's tough. And I want to mention this here in the I don't know what to call it right now. I'm calling it Neurodiversity and Disability Project. Like, it's not, I don't think it's it's not a time now. It's the wrong season. Like, I can think about when to plant the seeds, so to say, but this is not the season for it. The season we're in right now, as far as I'm concerned, is the methods project, the work we're doing here. Like, I'm committed to making this be a really big thing. And I've been thinking about how to best, do that. Like, obviously the core of it is the papers, and the pyramid and the questions. Which I should bring up here too. Whoops, there we go. So like this is what it's really about for us. And I very loosely put this together, but like I've developed a little bit of I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but I'll come back to this later. I've put together a little bit of an abstract for this paper, which I'll go back to later. The literacy of correlates idea. I don't know if that's going to be anything substantial or not, but I'm curious about it. Amanda's got her thing, Embodied from Neurophenomenology Project. I've got the Frontier Map favorite thing I'm working on. Those are kind of both going to be related to the ISPSM conference.
Yeah.
Which is due, I think 7 days, 7 or 8 days from now, basically, to submit those things. And we can talk about that also if we want to. But to kind of keep at just the last little bits of high levels, I do want to like make this a legitimate. I want this to be a real project, and we're doing it, and I want to keep momentum on it, and I want to keep doing what we're doing. We are doing it, and I'm super. I have a sense of urgency about it because I know that people tend to not always give a damn forever about certain things, especially if there's not movement on it that they want to do. So it's sort of like, okay, we have this thing now, and it's like, how do we grow it? And I'm still learning how to do that because I've never done that with like a true research project that's like this. That's this like theoretically and philosophically heavy, which is challenging but also like really cool. So I'm always open to feedback about that. But you know, the heart of it will be putting out these papers. I was even thinking about like redesigning stuff. Like I'm gonna redesign some things for Cognition Futures just to make it actually more like here's a project, or like almost like a subgroup of a lab itself, like it is, or like it used to be. Like there was a separate web page for it that way too. But it's sort of like here's what's happening, and a little bit more about, you know, that way, while also saying, yeah, here, getting these things out. And I have a little bit of momentum to kind of really get at these active things and put some words to them, particularly the actual papers or like the potential papers, or the semi-active projects, and thinking about these, like what can we put into them to get them going. And like even, I don't think, I'm just use Cherry as an example, but like if Cherry wants to come in and be like, okay, yeah, I've read a lot of stuff and I love to work on greatest hits for methodologies. You know, like great, like let's do that kind of a thing, and getting momentum there as it comes up. So that will be on the way, I guess. But it's kind of just keeping it going for now. And like I said, I don't necessarily see the disability project going there. But I think as I sort out, let me change this. As I sort out kind of my aversion to being in this space, and then what I think it's mostly going to derive like what phenomenologically does, and he has talked about it somewhere specifically. What are the I think what I want to do is, like, if possible, I wanted to nest it as much under Cognition Future as possible, but also like realize that the work there is going to be pushing at this sort of set medical political space, and I don't know. I'm wary about it, and it's sort of like, how do I do this thing that has a lot of relevance to important people in my life, and that I'm actually like, just to say this, and we'll move on totally from this. I think there's like down the road, like if I get into a PhD program or have free reign of doing stuff in a few years, I think the neurodivergent disability, personhood, chronic stuff, and a lot of like the biometrics, I guess I should put that here. That's a really interesting space for me that I'm dealing with in other areas, and also again the controversy about, oh well, if we have a biomarker, then what's that going to say for the people who are self-diagnosing, and like it's I need to that's short. That's kind of impossible. But the shorthand for me is like, how can I build this out in a way that lets me tangibly do something that's not just like fake? I want to do actual theory work in the space and not just closeted advocacy, and that's going to be my problem to sort out. So anyway, I don't want to.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about it in the coming months and years. Well, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I think it's definitely worth thinking about now, though, because you want to have a good base for it and, kind of link it into what we're doing here and what we're doing in SET. We talked about SET being sort of a separate thing, but it's, it's not necessarily, because we're not, I mean, what are we doing? We're doing like maybe one thing a year. And then there's so many opportunities, I think, to bring those things together, to bring some of the things we've been doing in other areas, like the open source sustainability is kind of like taking from the open source activities and moving it into that space and having a tie there. So I think definitely where we can tie things in is good. And when we're learning these things, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to keep them separate in our heads. There's always be coming back to these other areas that we're doing. So I think it's always worth at least taking kind of an informal stock of what might be for the future. So
yeah, and there's like this. I'm gonna try to spend like 60 seconds on this. I don't want to go here too much, but I'm reorganizing the whole Joe Pro thing and breaking it down into a little bit more of like, I'm trying to break it down into like, I'm not really a research center, maybe like research groups, but I'm gonna do mentoring programs, tools, and actual research programs. I haven't quite figured out the wording yet. But I'm trying to get to a space where like this is deeply related to my organizing stuff for the lab, in that I want to have a space where we can show like an overview of the lab stuff and kind of having like enough of a small portfolio on JoPro stuff, but also like Cognition Futures kind of could be its own website now, more specifically with a lot more components. So for things that are sort of in that niche, that like incubator state of here's a portfolio work in this area, like SET. I don't think SET's ever going to be a big project thing, but for Cognition Futures, yes. Like having space for the educational banner, that'd be more of a portfolio thing. Have a thing for saying the Google Summer of Code thing. Have a thing for like the mentoring program as it stands right now. This is actually, the website is like a tool. The internship program that we've done with the university, and then my own internship program with JoPro that's been smaller and like much more like tailored to specific things about JoPro related stuff, or it's kind of its own thing. But eventually I'm going to break those out into actually three different things and put more into there. So that's there's been a lot of top level organization to make space for stuff, and then actually doing the work of this. I guess the last thing I'll say to that end, and I don't know if you want to have any time, Amanda, to talk about your project stuff, or do you want me to just go into my things? I don't want to talk all about me necessarily. So
no, you're good. I don't have any updates for that.
Okay, cool. If you do if you want to talk about the submission or the abstract, I think it's like 500 words, so it's not that much. But like, if you want to talk about that this weekend or anytime, let me know and I can be available for that.
Yeah, I will let you know.
All I really did for this right now, the literacy of correlates, is like I put together a kind of badass, honestly sounding abstract.
I read it. I thought it was good.
At least
let's take a look. Yeah, I haven't seen it yet.
But it's all like very circumstantial. So my commentary about the project is basically that very speculative. And it could just be, I could see it basically ending at a blog post, honestly, or like for a future development. Like, I think it may also require like that we develop the pyramid further before I can do it right, honestly. However, it's tied to the gesture words as a method in a paper. If it's something that we sort out, it could be an actual prescriptive glossary term, which is kind of the fun thing. Like this is something that I say, okay, here's something we've put together, and we've fooled around with and tooled around with and made something that's like, okay, here's an actual like theoretical contribution. And I haven't seen anyone talk about it yet. I've seen some stuff dance around it, even today in like towards the end of the Stevens reading. Like he kind of alludes to basically what Varela's attempts at creating some standardization. And I don't know if this can ever like loftily hope to be in that same conversation of that. But basically, what is it? Like the draft abstract is basically talking about gestures. We're referencing the epoche in the letting go space, and how mastery is sort of this thing that you get used to by doing it more and more. And I'm saying it seems to relate to familiarity of how you relate to active and passive parts of going through that process. Validity of correlates may also be related to why some practices of meditation or mindfulness have difficulty getting past the gestures of awareness. And sort of like one of my friends, like, oh, I can't calm down enough to do it. I feel like I'm on duty. I can't relax. And I think some of it is like, as in terms of what I'm saying about what are the correlates, is like, as you're trying to let the go to the circumstances of letting go, there's these sort of sticking points of like, oh no, this part of my my letting go into totally passive state is blocked because something in this thing is telling me, okay, I can't do that. And I feel like there's sort of, I'm not saying that's a correlate, but I feel like to gain literacy about that, like circumstantial correlate or something, would be understanding kind of what's happening in that process and being able to navigate it or discuss it or do something with it. Because when you don't have the literacy about it, or you don't have a sense of agency about it, or you feel like, oh, I have no control over this thing, there's some blockage, it's like there's not really an ability to dialogue with that. So that's kind of where some of that comes from too. But then I also conclude a little bit with saying literacy implies a language or a context to interpret, and a potential supposition of this project is that mastery or familiarity with letting go can lend to better diagnosis of comprehension of what factors are impeding, inhibiting, or otherwise influencing attempts at completing the gesture of awareness. So it's kind of like, I don't really know what to call it. It's something, it's not quite, it's almost like peripersonal space, but not about physical. It's about like some kind of something between peripersonal space and interoception. That's how you're relating to stuff changing as you're letting go. But that's what I got for now.
It's about the dynamics of mental state space or something. Just make it really, really general.
Yeah, and then we're just like, oh, I just lost it. Stuff like that. So, I don't know. We don't have to talk about this much here, but it just kind of was a little bit of capturing some inspirational lightning in a bottle to just throw this out here. And I see many ways that I will be could change it in the future, but it's a place for now to start. Yeah, maybe something we can do is take a moment. We're already into the top of the hour, but are there any other things we thought about for potential projects? Just to review, we have Frontier Map, which maybe shouldn't belong here, but I just put it here for now. Amanda's project, reflection notes on gesture of awareness, which are, oh, that's cool. Let me do that. Maybe I'll just refine this into a blog or something. But this is like that. After reading that paper, we kind of put all the stuff out here. Master the order of chords, mutually informed constraint. Maybe we should do like. It might be good for us to write specifically something about what is mutually informed constraint, even if it's like a blog post, but some kind of an internal document about what it is. I don't even know if we have a. I'm sorry.
There's definitely a page for it, and I think it has some notes.
It is okay. Here. Should this be in the prescriptive, or is this a descriptive glossary item? By the way, I don't know if it's either. I feel like it could be both.
I feel like it could be both. I think maybe we keep things just in the descriptive because I want to think more about what the prescriptive should be, because I wouldn't want just like duplicates. I wouldn't want like, oh, here's a concept that we found and described, but we liked it, so let's just copy. I want to avoid duplicates like that.
Okay, good. I'm very happy to have that discussion.
That's a bit, and I feel like that's part of the project that is more in the future, because it's like as we write more and we want to have some common language within like across papers that we're trying to write, or just like I feel like the type of glossary that would be necessary will emerge once we do more.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
So how's your abstract coming, Amanda? The one that you're kind of focused on.
It's fine.
Okay.
I will be able to fix it up in a week for sure. I haven't really made much progress since our last meeting, but I will probably want comments, and I will message you guys.
Okay.
I actually forgot, because I have. Oh, they're both about the same time. I'm also doing Frontier Map for Jenny's Plot Twisters. Jenny's hyper digital design things, where I'm kind of talking about it in more of an educational technology sense. Oh boy, I keep going back and forth. Like, am I actually submitting? I think that's your stuff, Amanda. Right? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Okay. I don't think I put mine here yet, so I'm a bit. I'm not going to sort out right now if I'm doing Frontier Map or like actual just Cognition features mythology project or something broadly. I kind of forgot what that was supposed to be. But either way, we'll have Amanda's stuff there. Okay. I think at a high level or at a medium level, that's project development talk. Anything else before we go into the actual material?
No.
I think we were kind of around here. We were almost done with Evan Thompson's thing. There were like 2 or 3 pages left. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we were almost done, and I think maybe this was, I guess it was a few weeks ago that we met. Just I remember you saying something about wanting to talk about this metabolism idea. I also, Rosen, this is the same Rosen, this is anticipatory systems or whatever the name of that book is, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which one?
The
Robert
book
Rosen.
was recommended by someone at the Embodied Intelligence Conference who was a part of that group that we thought was neat, that independent research group that seemed like very like philosophy of cog-sci, philosophy of mind science oriented. They recommended anticipatory systems, I think is what it's called.
Yeah.
By Rosen. And I thought it was cool that Rosen was talked about here.
I have him in here. Robert Rosen?
Yeah, Robert Rosen. We talked about him in Devo from time to time, but I haven't talked about him in a while.
I think the book has a page already too.
Boy, I don't entirely remember what where were we talking about that? Oh, here we go. We use sort of draw from other work of the theoretical biology. This is I'm just gonna very broadly swipe at this. Okay, here we have some stuff here that's probably oh, I remember this a bit more now. Yeah, Umwelt. Let's put this here. So I remember this Umwelt stuff. It's kind of, I think, was my yeah, I remember that from last time. Let's see what was written up here. I don't have anything immediately to say about it. I feel like I will probably come up to it in a very, like it's going to barge in at something later. Metabolism repair systems.
Yeah, this was a really interesting section here. This is about like how a cell isn't a machine because there are a couple reasons he gives in here. One is that it's not Turing compatible, which means it's not compatible with the Turing Church thesis. And the other is that it's, what was it, like lacks efficient causation, which I assume means that it can't be optimized in the same way that a machine can. Which I actually have written some work on that with respect to like non-optimal systems and things like that. So I'm kind of interested in that. I don't know. And kind of like my familiarity with Rosen's work is kind of superficial in the sense that I've not really drilled down into a lot of the details of it, but I think this is pretty cool. I mean,
I thought it was interesting that, so I guess this gave me a better understanding of autopoiesis because, so like not all metabolism repair systems have to be autopoietic.
Right.
Because that's necessary feature of an autopoietic system is this maintenance of its own boundary. Whereas you can have a metabolism repair system that does not maintain its own boundary. Generating its own boundary and internal topology. I thought that was interesting in relation to the von Forster's demons talk,
Oh yeah.
and how a self-organizing system like keeps its entropy manageable. It like counteracts increases in entropy in like potentially two ways, and maybe the metabolism repair system only has one demon that defines it, whereas an autopoietic system needs a second or something.
Maybe. I'm just taking notes on this. Actually, a lot of this also reminds me of some of the stuff, like the debates about what is something that's alive.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, the aspect of, like, reproduction, self-repair, metabolism being part of that as well, like producing your own energy or transforming energy in a way that's... So, I mean, machines are basically, actually, you can build a self-healing machine. They're self-healing materials that aren't, like, alive. And so, that I don't know. I mean, they kind of fall within the MR regime, but like they kind of may or may not be alive. So, I mean, there are a lot of these categories that we can look at and say, what are the basic competencies of something that's alive? And so MR systems might be a way to like kind of get at some of that gray area of what's alive and what's not. But, go through these like debates about like a living system versus a mechanical system. And it's a common thing actually in the A-Life community. They talk about it a lot. And, you have these things that maybe look alive, but they're not, versus actually being alive. So, there are things that mimic being alive with their behavior, but they're not alive. And so what are what are the criterion that they have to meet? It's, it's one of these debates that is like, you don't learn anything new by engaging in it. You just kind of keep asking more questions. So, yeah.
I am curious. I don't feel like I have enough context to understand this thing about Francisco and theology. He was resistant to the idea of being involved, and he changed his mind. None of the organism's sense making.
What does natural purposes mean? Kant's natural purposes. I'm not familiar with that.
Sounds almost like I don't know how that scores with like Aristotelian virtue ethics, or I'm just, because it says virtue here unintentionally, that I'm associating with that. But,
no, it means because it's self-organizing, it leads to the natural purposes.
I think that an organism has like ends in and of themselves. They have like intrinsic ends, whereas other things only have maybe ends in virtue of something else needing it, like instrumental value versus intrinsic value or something. But I'm not sure.
So, like, yeah, like an organism has to find its own resources, or like a person has drives that are intrinsic needs, and that's driven. Like, a machine doesn't have that necessarily. Although, again, you get to that sloppy middle ground where you might have a machine that can potentially try to find its own energy or something. I don't know, like, but yeah, I see what you mean. Like, there is that thing, and I know we talked about this in some of the papers in the Saturday meeting. There are some of the papers by the Flowers Group in Paris where they talk about like some of the intrinsic mechanisms. There's a paper, I think, the one on intrinsic mechanisms of agents and how that's important to model for learning and for something that you want to claim as intelligent. And so there is this aspect of intrinsic needs or intrinsic mechanisms. So it's like you're learning because you want to learn, or it isn't because you need to learn necessarily, something like that. So yeah.
This was one of the first times that I read something about Kant, and I was like, "Ooh, I want to look into this more."
You're not a fan, or
what say about this?
I mean, I don't like. You're not a fan of Kant, or
I don't know why. I just like my eyes glaze over whenever I try to read it. I really don't have a good reason for that. It's not like I've been forced to read Kant or take a class or anything.
I didn't know you could do that in philosophy. Like you could just not read like one of the.
It's probably because I skipped intro to philosophy when I was taking classes. I managed to do the minor without taking intro. I just like cherry picked the specific like niche classes I wanted. And then when I taught intro to philosophy, I had free reign, so I just didn't include Kant.
Do you have any complaints, or?
Oh no, there's plenty of other big names.
Yeah. So if philosophy was your minor, what was your major?
Cog Sci.
Oh, okay. So it was like Cog Sci with a specialty in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, that's great. But at the University of Michigan, what do they? What is their Cog Sci program like? I'm just curious.
So when I did it, it was maybe 5 years old, and it's not a department, it's a center, and it takes classes from other departments for the major, and there are different tracks you can do. And so the major involved classes in linguistics and psychology and philosophy, computer science. There were some others that fulfilled things. So it was like a smattering, and it was a little disorganized. There was one intro to Cog Sci class that everyone had to take, and in a way that class, the structure of that class was kind of representative of the structure of the major as a whole, because the class was like 5 units on 5 different topics of study in Cog Sci, and it was not really clear at the end what unified them all.
Yeah.
There was a unit on like decision making in robotics, and there was a unit on language acquisition. There was a unit on the philosophy of mind and like consciousness, like how do we define consciousness? And it was very each unit felt very self-contained. It wasn't quite clear how they all connected, and then each class for the major kind of was the same in the sense that like you got a vibe from each, then you like were told what Cog Sci was, but it was really I never had a class that was like, this is cognitive science. I guess I had one that just was, it was a philosophy class called Minds and Machines, and it kind of like just so happened to provide that kind of foundation for Cog Sci, because it talked a bit about the history of cognitive science, but the professor was like 90 years old, and we had like a textbook. It was Unified Theories of Cognition by Simon and Newell. So it was like 80s computational Cog Sci, like symbolic processing, and it was really cool. But like that was the class that probably was most illuminating about like what Cog Sci was, and it was very outdated.
Yeah.
But it was great. It was I really liked that I had the flexibility, and that I could take like so many different kinds of classes and have it all count towards a degree.
So that's great.
Go ahead, Bradly.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I just hadn't known like your back, like what you had done in your undergrad too much. I thought you had majored in philosophy. That's why. I mean, I knew you had an interest in Cog Sci. I didn't know you actually majored in Cog Sci and then minored in philosophy.
Yeah, so I definitely took more philosophy classes than other things, and then I did the master's in philosophy.
Okay, yeah.
So I have a few things to say, and I don't want to talk about your background too much. But one, I'm kind of with you about Kant. I've always done best when other people just tell me about what he said, as opposed to trying to interpret it myself. I kept trying to think of a really cool joke to make about you being anti-categorical imperative or something, or like how great a diss it would be that you categorically excluded him from all of your teaching. Like that's like I've seen in my like social media, like Instagram things, for whatever reason. I think it's because like the finals are here, but I'm getting all these basketball things about like dunking on people. I feel like if you're gonna dunk on Kant, like in that sense, like yes, like I'm just, yeah, you're gonna be categorically, denied. It's like what's happening. So that's, I'm sure there's a great way to say that, but more importantly and more fittingly, if I had to script in my mind what I would interpret kind of the state of cognitive science education being, as someone who's never taken a cognitive science course or a major at all, but just from reading about it and talking about it with people from afar. And granted, I think it's a little bit easier for me to say this because I think Amanda and I and all of us here in this group are kind of on the same page about something. Like there are hardcore cognitives out there. There are people who are going to say, screw your phenomenological stuff. Like the mind is the computer. Like stop. Like you're just wasting your time. Like there's those people. But I feel like given the nuance of the audience and you, and given my background, I'm like, yes, I didn't want to interrupt you because I felt like saying, in one sense, how you described the experience about the different silos. And then, well, there's one course that kind of brings it together, but it is what you said is like, yes, this is exactly my kind of model of what cognitive science education kind of not is, but like was/is.
Yeah.
And with the unifying thing being the sort of 80s, 90s semi-cognitivist mind is machine is brain stuff. And it dovetails really well with Margaret Bowden's take on things and her Brain is Machines book, and she's a little on the cognitivist camp somewhat. But I always think it's such a great reference point for me in my mind about this is like, there was basically, she mentioned 2007, and like up until 2007, there wasn't a lot of diversity. Like you had a few different groups. It's like you could one person could have a sense, okay, here's like the tree of cognitive science. Here's this lab. Here's this group's doing. You can have a sense of it. But 2007 kind of like, that's the point where it's like, at this point, and she is someone very experienced in the field is saying, like, there's just too much now. There's so much diversity and like different schools and sects and thoughts and labs and things going different directions that there's just no way to give a comprehensive description anymore about what's going on. And I feel like I always think about that when I'm talking about some of the big picture things in like this group and in general, because I don't think that that's in a slightly completionist sense, like, yeah, I would love to know, okay, well, what's the whole story? Where did it go? What are people thinking now? And it's like, it's almost weird because I have some skepticism, like, oh yeah, I love talking about Norbert Weiner and these old school people and stuff like that. And this sort of lineage, I have this lineage that we're kind of favoriting right now, whereas like Varela, Evan Thompson, and this sort of gesture of awareness train of thought. And now like Fuchs is kind of a modern take on things, and Tom Froese and Fuchs, and like there's this cluster here that's like, okay, and then, you know, sort of the cybernetic Lisa Feldman Barrett types that are like, we're kind of like dancing around. But it's like, that's sort of like the known universe to me. And there's just like a lot of spaces that aren't, there's just no way of really there's not going to be, no one's going to be able to write, like there's the cognitive atlas, you know, that Poldrack did kind of, and there's just not going to be that anymore. And it's like, holy crap, like what do you do? And that's partly why Frontier Map exists. But even then it's like, yeah, like what do we do with that? And like there's such weird time pressures and like theoretical limits to it. And I feel like, I don't know, I think that's I have a very compassionate take for the trouble of that situation. And I don't, which of them, you know, in doing this project and then Frontier Map and all this stuff is like, I don't know. I think it's gonna just be, I think everybody's kind of just, you know, trying to take a stab at it somehow. And I don't know. I don't know if there's going to be anything like an actual cognitive science ever. And I think also there's a lot of really, as we know, the fun stuff is sort of like Tony Shimamaro and other folks saying, yeah, like, you know, are we just going to have to like get as close as we can to as throwing the baby out with the bathwater and just redefining a lot of these concepts because we can't do this thing.
Yeah, I mean, if you throw away the idea of mind as a machine, can we even call it cognitive science anymore? Because cognitive.
Yeah, that was my thought is because I was thinking about this minds and machines class and why like that is it. We did talk about like what CogSci was, because the premise of CogSci is that the mind is a computer. And then so what we have now is like this weird reaction to that, and these new branches of CogSci that are just like in some cases they're like regurgitating other non-cognitive science disciplines just under new headings of like embodied CogSci. Maybe like you have like philosophical phenomenology that's already done all that kind of stuff, and then there's like cultural, like sociological studies that have already talked about this embedded CogSci, like, and not that there isn't value in framing it as cognitive science, but it does seem to me that in this, like, CogSci is arguably this, like, the mind is a computer. You start there, that can mean a bunch of different things, but that's the starting point. And right now we have these, like, it's like eating itself.
Yeah.
And I really like how Inez Hippolyta talked about that a little bit in the podcast that I mentioned, because she basically says there's a history and kind of a pattern to this about whatever the most sophisticated or interesting tool that we have access to at a popular level at the time becomes the analogy. It could be an instrument, a piano in the past, you know, the stuff here that becomes these other machines, and then it becomes a computer, and now it's a neural network, you know, like it's in predictive coding and these sort of Bayesian stuff, and it's like whatever sort of is the current state of art thing that's tenable becomes the analogy. And it's like, I think there's something to that, but also yes, I think I would say, right, you said there's sort of the Ouroboros, is that the snakes eating itself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of that happening too, and I feel like I mean, this is supposed to be a really wonderful topic to just endlessly talk about, like theories for the future, and how do you reunite the stuff. I kind of, this is a deep cut, and nobody's probably going to get this unless you played like some of the Elder Scrolls games, like Skyrim and stuff. But at one point, all the elves were like a unified. There was like elves and then men and then other groups of people. And then the elves like split up into like the underground Dwemer and then the high elves and like these other elves and stuff like that. And I feel like one of my theories when I was a big nerd into that universe was like, I'm going to come up with a theory to reunite all the elves, and then they're going to like, you know, become cool again, or I don't know, do a lot of stuff. And I feel like there's such weird tension between reuniting and like revolutionizing, and then how do you not throw what are there babies to be concerned about throwing out alongside with the bathwater? It's like there's not really going to be anything for that. And it's sort of like there's this meta, like Norbert Weiner feeling that I have about like what is the enclave of meaning in like all of this mess that's coming at the deluge of just, and it's so tough to like look at, like looking at grad school and websites and like who's doing what, and like there's Judy Fan and Anthony Chamero and like the Blam Lab with the Kraukirk and Conrad Corey and the neuroscience people and causality, and it's just like, lots of people who care the right way and care about stuff, but I don't know.
Yeah.
So I think last thing I'll say is like I think there's a place for some very high level goals that extend beyond an individual, are kind of planetary goals, and also really deep subjective lower level goals that could offer some framing, but that's sort of another discussion. So we only have 23 minutes left for this, and we're still on the same paper, so to be continued. And we'll look back at this like in some months and be like, yeah, that was really cool, and follow up on that. But we don't have to.
Yeah, it's definitely worth thinking about more.
So going back to the text or the end of it, I don't know. Do we have any thoughts about this? There's this whole like, honestly, page 87, when it gets into rosin and then the conclusion of this is just like, wow, like there's just, I don't know how to wrap my head around it. In the sense of go on Ventura, neo-Darwinism, Kant, and this all this teleology stuff. Thus, naturalizing phenomenology for Francisco always implied corresponding phenomenological reconceptualization of nature. Do we want to take a stab at what that means? Like, does that basically mean, by reconceptualization of nature, do you think that means, like, what I guess what that means to me is like the whole, basically kind of what we talked about, like, it's not just it's kind of like redoing the entire relationship of a person and how we're observing the world to an extent. But I'm curious what you guys think about this at all.
Yeah, so if the first personal methods are meant to inform like the third personal and vice versa, I kind of, because I also really like this quote, I kind of imagined this as meaning like, what is naturalizing phenomenology? Say it's finding third personal measures of real phenomenological categories. A flip side of that will be if you have mutually informed constraint, it's not all like first personal to third personal, it's also vice versa. So if you successfully naturalize phenomenology and find that third personal correlates to the first personal properties, then you've also like, you've learned something about both sides.
Mm-hmm.
So as you find new scientific definitions of first personal experience, that can also that will like change your first personal concepts, maybe. Like if through third personal study you basically the third personal stuff has an impact on your first personal experience, just as the first personal experience should have an impact on third personal study. If the goal is to carve nature at its joints, to use the phrase from Philosophy of Science, then if part of that process involves so intimately this like first personal data gathering, then progress will also affect that your first personal experience. You'll like have new concepts to apply to the world, and that means like new experiences of the world, I think, in its most like extreme form.
Yeah.
Let's read this thing here. Francisco's revisiting the problem of teleology reflects insights, mind-body problems, first and foremost lived experience, as he wrote in this last bit about Canon John, is actually the experience of our teleology, our wish to exist further on as a subject, not our imputation of purposes or objects. What does imputation mean? Like stopping? Like
the projection of our purposes on the objects.
Okay.
We're giving the object's purpose.
What was that? Sorry.
Like we're giving the object's purpose, but then organisms, in contrast, don't have to be given purpose by another thing.
The teleology becomes real rather than an intellectual principle. Before being scientists, we are first living beings, and we have such evidence of intrinsic teleology in us. And then, observing other creatures struggling to continue their existence, starting from simple bacteria that actually some way from chemical propellants, we can, by our own evidence, understand teleology as a governing force in the realm of the living. Theories about living can only be conceived from the fragile and concerned perspective of living itself, and according to us, life can only be known by life. Wow, that's really, there's an amazing quote that I'm going to reference for myself to look back years from now, is that in Critical Role, a very funnily awkward worded quote from one of my favorite characters was, it's been dunked on several times by the cast later, was that life needs things to live. And it's kind of very much related to life can only be known by life. Cool. This kind of conclusion of stuff here.
So basically what he's saying is that you experience things as you move through time, and then you can reference back. So teleology doesn't make any sense unless you have a reference point. You can't say like something is teleological a priori. You have to sort of experience it and then say, oh yes, this is what happened in the past. And then obviously, if you don't think about it too much, obviously there's a force, or there's something that's guiding me through time, but it's really just your interactions. So I think earlier he says that it's aligned with like emergence teleology. So go ahead, Amanda.
And I guess what that evokes for me is that there's this sort of, I don't know if it's fair to say one person, third person disparity, but the everything humans, it's sort of like just because a communication or a viewpoint or something happens, is put out, or an idea happens, there's kind of a potential illusion that it wasn't connected to an individual's unique, subjective, personal, emergent moment. Like it came through moments only, but then becomes in this space where it's accessible to things other than that. And I think it's sort of that, something about that. Consider the question, how is that we're able to recognize or comprehend the former dynamic pattern of autopoiesis in the first place? Will this pattern be recognizable at all from the ideal objectives standpoint? Or is it rather that we're able to recognize this pattern only because it resembles from our own bodily selfhood, which we know firsthand? I think I think there's something about this I really want to say, and I don't know what it is. But I was thinking about this actually when we got into some of this other stuff here for the next reading. I feel like I'm gonna go there now. There's in this reading when I don't forget where it is in the book because I was listening to it. It was kind of talking about the need for some kind of a reproducible standardization and how you like it was trying to delineate. Well, you have to kind of approach it in a specific way to deal with what are you looking at. Like you can't just say, oh man, what was I talking about? I think this came up here. Like these different scales and intensity, trying to quantify phenomenological stuff. And maybe we'll get there next time, but like I feel like the reference point is like elaborating upon this, like the shared reference point we have is the bodily selfhood somehow. But I don't know. I think I'm just going to copy this and like.
I think this is also connected to Fuchs's discussion of relations, like relationality, as being necessary for meaning. Like a questionnaire about, so there's like a psychedelic experiences questionnaire that studies will try to use. It's called like the altered states questionnaire. I guess it's been used for psychedelics, but also other altered states of consciousness. And that can only be so good. I mean, it could probably be a lot better than it is. But it can also only be so good if it's like it needs to be like making contact with the right features of experience. Like the subject needs to be able to read the questions and then relate the concepts from the questions to their own experience. They need to like be able to recognize what the questions are getting at with reference to their own experience.
So he says the phenomenology answer is an adequate account of certain observable phenomena in organism and autopoiesis, the source of meaning in the concept as a live body at first person animate bodily existence. These concepts and accounts for which they figure aren't derivable even in principle from observer independent, non-indexical, objective psychofunctional descriptions according to the physicalist myth of science. These concepts and bodies which they figured aren't derivable. Okay, and that I suppose also means like reducible too. No disembodied and purely intellectual mind would be able to comprehend the form of the organism simply from a complete knowledge of the microphysical state of things. Merleau-Ponty, I cannot understand the function of the living body except by enacting it myself, and except so far as I am a body which arises towards the world. The basic ground of new phenomenology is irreducible nature of conscious experience. He wrote where we start from and where we all must link back to like a guiding thread. Let us be clear what this means. Experience is irreducible not because it possesses metaphysically peculiar properties, physicalist beliefs, another fashion of their properties. It's irreducible because of its ineliminable transcendental character lived experience is always already presupposed that any statement model, this is what I was actually trying to get at earlier. It's already presupposed by any statement model theory, and lived body is an a priori invariant of lived experience. Experience is the unhintergabegate, the ungo behindable. There's no dualism or idealism here. It's the transcendental lived body, empirical living, reverse, so on. Feels very Taoist in this also. Okay, so we're kind of at the end. We're almost out of time too. I don't know if you want to say anything about this. This is kind of just personal commentary and some stuff, which is pretty cool. I guess we can either talk about thoughts about this, or like if you have any things you want to preview or tease talking about this one, because there were some interesting overlaps between all of this. And I think this is actually a really cool one to have done next, because it gets at the methods question directly. Excuse me. Any concluding thoughts on this document that we read?
I don't think so. I found it, I liked the style. I liked that it was clearly a talk that had been just like transcribed.
Yeah, I feel like it gives me a little bit of more personal take on it gives me a little bit more personal take on Francisco stuff. I think there's also there's actually a lot. I wouldn't get into it now, but I think there's actually quite a bit in like his end of life stuff and how that changed some of his things. Like that's always quite an interesting thing to really think about as like an actual, almost like meta phenomenological line of inquiry. But yeah, we have like 7 minutes left. I take it we're okay with reading this one next time. I liked reading it or listening to it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that sounds good for next time. I guess one more thought about the Varela stuff, because I really appreciated the talk of the personal stuff, because it's like, although I found none of it surprising, like it would have been strange if he like didn't. I think Thompson says something about how he. I can't remember, but it gave me the impression that he like practiced what he preached in a sense. Like it's clear from his academic interests that he was like thoughtful and observing in these ways. So like, it was
upgrading his views in nature, like he thought like the teleology stuff, or like how shift shifted more, or
just like open-minded, but there was this like common thread through all of his work, and it was he talks about the importance of first personal experience, and then it seems like he was like practiced mindfulness in a sense. He engaged in these first personal practices and was like thoughtful and reflective. So like I said, it would have been surprising if Thompson had said otherwise, given these pieces of philosophy we've read. But because sometimes, I guess, to contrast, sometimes I read things from cognitive scientists or philosophers, and I just think, going back to relationality, I'm like, this does not make any sense to me. Like, maybe your experience of the world is just wildly, and I'm sure in some respects it is wildly different from mine. But you read some philosophy and you're like, this has nothing to do with life. This has absolutely nothing to do with real life. Even if you're talking about things that are super important and fundamental and should be things that all of us can relate to, sometimes those things are talked about in ways that just like strip them of their meaning almost. And Varela's stuff is absolutely not like that at all. At least not to me. So yeah, it wasn't surprising that, because then I think about these other philosophers and like, do you just not engage in this reflection? Do you not find it valuable? But since Varela's whole argument is that first personal experience is the foundation of everything else, there's no way he could have been one of these figures that just seem like robots sometimes.
What is it about relational? I mean, when you say relational, what is it that they? I mean, how does that not connect? I'm just curious. Yeah.
Very generally, I feel like I've read philosophers and cognitive scientists talk about the mind and talk about the way the mind is supposed to work, and it just doesn't sound right. And that, not that that's the end all be all, but if it just doesn't sound right and it doesn't line up with your experience, then there's a sense in which it doesn't get off the ground. And I know that it's different depending on the domain. Like obviously, you don't have to have descriptions of cell biology or like neuronal level activity don't have to line up with what it feels like to be alive. But if we're talking about something about the level of operations that's supposed to be like what we experience, then I think it's what one author we read called like the mind problem with the symbolic processing kind of view, because it's like it doesn't. You read this symbolic processing view of the mind, this like computational view, and it's like that's not really what it feels like. But this is all supposed to be the subpersonal, but then you have this gap between the subpersonal and the personal. So it's like you're not quite there. So Varela was describing this personal level, and because of that, we can like. I keep wanting to say like make contact with what he's talking about, but like we read the gesture of awareness and it's describing a process that we can all attempt and maybe do so like successfully. And then we have an experience that matches with this description. And a lot of CogSci doesn't do that. A lot of it is just not in the business of doing that, which is fine.
I have very strong. Go ahead. I don't want to interrupt anyone's thought.
No, it was very good. That was a very good explanation, Amanda. Thank you.
I very much agree with that, and I feel like prior to waxing more about that, I go back to this. I think, and maybe this isn't the best thing for me to doing, but when I think about this, this discussion was related to that, in that I think so much, and it's kind of related. It's kind of related to what if there's a theoretical philosophical driver behind this, specifically this part, and specifically related to this, the ethics. I'm just doing this for myself for later. It has to do with, and I wrote this here, like non-monolithic integration of personal experience. Like, where is the sense of one, what it's like? There's a certain, I don't want to be overly political and say this is too bombastic and not nuanced to say, but to kind of offer a flavor of something. I think there's sort of a, for lack of better terms, weird patriarchal, privileged, isolated take on what experiences are that dominates a lot of discussions about this. And that's a very politically charged statement, and I don't want it to be, but I think there's something to it that's that way. And so what I more so want to get at is that I think a lot of my, and I think that's partly why I'm a little bit like some aspects of classic philosophers don't sit well with me at all. Or like I feel like kind of like what I said at the end of a couple of meetings ago about the Saturday meetings, where I'm like, if there's a modern day Norbert Weiner, I think he would be kind of adamant about this changing of embodiments and like practices and putting yourself in these different situations, exposure to different networks. Like that's something that just hasn't been readily available. I don't think it's necessarily, I don't think people writing in the past were trying to be narrow-minded or trying to be unrelatable. I don't think that was the intention of everybody. I don't think they've had the pressure or the opportunity to explore certain things in certain ways. And I think there's a unique opportunity for that now relative to a lot of the technological stuff we have access to and how that affords these things. Point being, I would just say, I think there's a inviting, breadcrumb leaving openness that is humble to the fact that what we're trying to do is wicked hard. My Bostonian wicked. But like, I don't even like saying it, but it just came up there. But you know, it's like, it's that part of things. And I feel like I feel like sometimes a lot of this talk kind of comes from the ivory tower. Oh, the mind's this way, this is this way. And it's like, no, actually it's you know, in the 21st century, and we're still cobbling together stuff, and the computer thing didn't really hold out, but it did do some things really well. And you have the people who are clinging to that, and people don't want to do that. And speaking to that reality, I think is part of the reality of the hardship of trying to communicate it. I think is something that is part of the relatable factor and understanding that. So I'll leave it at that. There's a lot more that can be said, but we're kind of over time. So any other closing thoughts, I guess?
I think that the neurodivergent stuff fits really easily and nicely into the methods project. Basically, because I see how it's political, but I see a version of it that doesn't have to be, because you don't have to say anything about what counts as what label, but just the premise of first personal investigation. One feature of that will be like discerning the I think the phrase I used was like dimensions of variation in first personal experience. And if you start there, I think that's the basis for like a really like radical, like not necessarily political, but just the basis for a really like radical in the sense of like that first paper that we read for this group, in like radical inaction, just like openness. I can't remember the exact phrasing, but just the premise of different minds are different because of the developmental trajectory, because of whatever. I think that can get you very far, and that's why it just is I can't imagine the methods project without that premise.
That's excellent, and I feel like you've done the layup and the alley oop. And what I will say to end that is like, if I can remember what I wanted to say, is sort of, I think it's important. So, and this, I will couch this by saying, as someone who studied like climate change policy and a little bit of like sustainable science or like environmental science and a lot of like big picture, like international relations, things like that and other things, and some macros, not complex systems in a field, but like actual these systems on human related weird stuff, which I interpret, you know, this cognitive stuff as. I think it's very valuable to always keep in mind, why don't we have a good theory about cognitive science? It's because we're fundamentally missing really key context by which the theories are being built around. So we build parts of it out, and then it's like, okay, it works, but then it crumbles when it's almost like the brittleness of some AI stuff in that sense, or like at least the not like combined or holistic nature of it. And I think this is related to that. And I don't feel ridiculously hopeful, but I also feel like that understanding of the incomplete, understanding there is incompleteness in all theories in a very Norbert Weinerian sense, but some of it's just, there's stuff missing. There's really important stuff that just hasn't really been built into things yet. And maybe this will lead in that direction, regardless of, you know, these other parts or not. Anyway, it's over time.
Right.
So thank you all for your time today. And
Yeah.
I'll be able to carry anything further to next week in Slack or otherwise. But thank you so much for tonight and have a good one.
You too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.
All right.